needed conversations, such as I participated in with Ari and others in our communities for 25 years and more. Let's start the response with you, the audience, and we'll come back to you for questions after our conversation with Nizar and Julie. I'd like to hear from 4 or 5 of you, a single word, a phrase on your gut response to this play, perhaps from today's perspective of the October 7th and Gaza war impact enormities. Just shout out a word or a phrase.
Depressing.
Depressing, okay.
Incisive.
Incisive.
Divisive.
Incisive. Impressive, incisive, divisive.
I said divisive.
Divisive, right. We had
A loss.
a loss.
Yearning.
Yearning. Okay. Good. This conversation is part 2 of Enough of Blood and Tears, Enough. An emphasis on the question mark I added to Rabin's passionate plea on the White House lawn. Because what we now see are the ashes and ruins of the traumas of October 7th, followed by Israel's destruction of Gaza, and it's taking tens of thousands of Palestinian lives, and also violently tightening the noose on the West Bank and East Jerusalem. So how to respond now to this passionate Israeli play from the brokenness in Israeli society 30 years ago? The unfulfilled dilemma of Palestinian agency. Truly hearing Palestinian aspirations, only a whisper in this play's background. Some of its characters step out of it into now and look back at how they felt then and what they're doing with the enormity of now. You have the bios of Nizar Farsakh and Julie Dickman in your programs. Nizar, Julie, and I chose to be together a few weeks after the start of the war with about 10 other Washingtonians for 10 weeks of one-on-one and group interactions, coping with how shattered we felt, and connected or disconnected to the events between the river and the sea so horribly getting out of control. Julie and myself, in different eras and in different ways, through our connection to Israel, came to the West Bank to listen and learn from Palestinians. My path led me to representing in the US and advising on the ground a Palestinian nonviolence movement and leader. And Julie worked with me for a year, 2022, 23, in DC, on that representation. My first meeting with Nizar was at the PLO mission in DC about 15 years ago. Such a mission once existed, and once Nizar was Director General. We met with a group of US students that I had brought to him, including my daughter, who were developing on-the-ground summer exchanges. Since then, he's been a friend, advisor, and measuring stick of what I hope to achieve. So I'm going to turn first to Julie. You've been in DC less than 2 years, working in the Israel-Palestine sphere when the war hit. An overwhelming array of feelings and thoughts brought the 3 of us into the space of that, what we call Dyads group. Dyads speaks of the one-on-one conversations we brought back to process in the group. Can you speak of how all the feelings of that time might still be with you, and also how they might be with you to give some first responses to the play?
Thank you, Stephen. So I remember meeting with this group. It was, what, 10 of us?
Yeah.
And shout out to Nizar because he was the only Palestinian in the group.
You stole my line. I was about to say it, but that's okay.
I was thinking today what was important during those diets and why that felt important to me. And as someone who regularly shows up in Palestinian and Arab-led spaces and protest at events at galas, it was important to me because I could shamelessly grieve with Israelis and for Israel and for the Jewish people, and I could shamelessly express my feelings. I was shook and horrified by the responses and reactions of a lot of my friends and my peers, and I felt a lot of relief in meeting with this group. And other than the observation that Nizar was the only Palestinian in the group, I have to make this other comment, which is not an offense. But I was the youngest person there by far, which I think also speaks to how my generation and my peers have reacted to the past few years. So I'm very grateful for those diodes, and it allowed me to break up into a million pieces and then recompose myself to then show up as a whole in other spaces. So that was very important to me.
So how do those million pieces, those million pieces first response to this play? Or any one of those pieces. Coming through all of that,
Yeah.
when you see this play from Israeli, I call it Israeli brokenness, what does that say to the situation within yourself or within the world?
I feel like I was at the time, and even now, I felt a lot of conflicting thoughts and feelings. It was confusing because as I was watching the footage of October 7th playing over and over and over, and the reactions of people around the world, I knew, like everyone else, I think in this room and in the world that follows the region and knows the region well, that whatever response Israel was going to pursue was going to be disproportionate. And so I was holding that shatteredness. I don't even know if that's the word in English, but I was shattered, and at the same time I was preparing myself and bracing myself for what would come afterwards. And that's why I say shamelessly grieving with Israelis, because I knew that was going to happen, and I knew it was going to be unacceptable to grieve for Israel. And it's something that it's still something I keep in secret sometimes. My grief for Israel and Israelis is more secret than my grief for Palestine and for Palestinians. I don't know if anyone else feels this, but I do.
Thanks. Nizar, we've been in and out of connection, focusing some work together over these past 15 years. Like Julie, I was so struck as the dyad group was started by your willingness to participate. You said something that really hit home with me then. Something like, at this time, I just want to be with my people, but something tells me I also need to be here. Do I remember correctly? And can you share where you were, where you are, and how all of it conditions your response to the play?
So I teach negotiation at GW. So that morning, I hadn't heard the news. I just read something that something had happened, right? And one of the students who happened to be Israeli told me, "Did you hear the news?" I told him, "Yeah, it's terrible." Not having actually understood what was the scale. So when I went home after the class and saw the images of Hamas militants in Israeli kibbutzim, right? This sense of dread, of, oh my God, this is such an unthinkable image. The Israelis are gonna flip, right? Like, this is such a nightmare, right? What's gonna come is not even a tsunami. It's something worse than a tsunami, right? Because I understood very well that image of the flood of people coming through the fence and militant and this woman in I think 3rd floor filming and saying, oh my God, the terrorists are here in town, right? That is something that I knew Israel will need to erase, right? There was such a sense of insecurity. October 6th, they were confident they've got this. October 7th, oh my God, we don't know what we're doing, right? And knowing that, I knew that, of course, Gaza had gone re-leveled, and that fear and insecurity that's coming from Israel. So a lot of the cruelty that we see is just insecurity, right? You're so petrified of the other, you don't want to blood their nose. You want to turn them into dust, right? Because you're so scared of them. So I was very present to my privilege. I'm here, I'm safe. Even my relatives who are in Deir Zayed, in the West Bank, are of course much safer than the ones in Gaza. So feeling like this is going to be exceptionally horrendous, and what matters now is what am I gonna do? Right? It is scary, and what's scary about it is just this disorientation. We don't know what this is, right? Like this is, we're back to 1948. It's like a redo of 1948, right? Like we didn't settle the score in 1948. We're gonna settle it now, right? And it's such a new place. Anything could happen. So I knew that we don't have now the tools to know how to deal with this. And therefore I need to be humble and forget my expertise and experiment. Right? I don't know where the answer is, but I know that it's not in sitting. I need to engage. And I have the privilege that I happen to have Jewish American friends and Israeli friends. I'm gonna need to be there, as difficult as it is, because for us, it is, ironically, I was speaking with also a 26-year-old young Palestinian. She's actually doing her PhD about historiography. And it just dawned to me that she became aware after 2007, like after Hamas captured Gaza, right? So how much she didn't know, right? She didn't live the Oslo years and how different that was, right? So I knew that I can do something and have some sort of input that is different from others, and therefore my job is to do that. I happen to be somebody who's now in DC, who happens to know these people, so I can tell them something that they cannot hear from somebody else, right? I can give them a perspective that they don't have access to, right? So that's what I have to do. Now, as this play or a musical, I think it was very true to what it was like, right? The sense of hope. I actually did relate to Rabin's attitude of you cannot be scared of this. Like, yeah, of course there are dangers, but you don't go and lock yourself in a closet. You're gonna have to engage the work, right? And if I were him, I would also not have worn the bulletproof vest, because again, it's about you're gonna have to show up for your values. You can't be too. Either you believe in those values or you don't, right? So that made me think about now, what does that look like? What does a Rabin of 2025, 2026 look like? I don't know. But I know it's going to come from a place that I'm not familiar with. So we actually also today, coincidence, we had a conversation, the Palestinian members of the A Land for All, and we were talking about this, about what is that new politics going to look like? We don't know, but we know that it has to be with engagement, right? Like that we cannot keep this politics as usual of political parties and divisions and what have you. No, we need the people to be engaged, and that I think is something where both the Israeli and the Palestinian experience has been one of the failure of leadership, and the sense of maybe this is the silver lining of this is we cannot have this happen again, right? So there is all of that silent majority is now mobilized to do something. We're tripping, we're stumbling, sure, but we are motivated to try new things and not surrender those decisions to people who have other motives.
Yes. Two really interesting words, shamelessness and dread. I mean, this shamelessness of grieving. I mean, in a way, suddenly the grieving over what has been fundamentally unaddressed for 100 years is building to the horrors of October 7th. I would call them genocidal horrors, and then the genocidal horrors of the Israeli response. That was the dread, and yet somehow the deluge was even, was somehow even deeper and more shocking, and maybe we're somehow finding our feet from it. Now, what are the conversations that we can have that lead to actions? Maybe this is a little piece of one of them, in our communities here, with the communities on the ground there, to build toward what you're talking about. These are those next steps of, I mean, I also have been lifted by people who continue to do the work, even though it's been put in shatters. What are the conversations going ahead that might lead to some kind of action? What do you think, Julie?
As a Jew in the United States, in this moment, I realize the responsibility that I hold and the power and the strength of it. What many of us have been doing over the past 2 years, and even before October 7th, has been trying to educate, even in the smaller scale, like our families, our family friends, our synagogues, to have a different perspective on this. And before October 7th, it was about having a different perspective and being more empathetic and nicer, maybe. But after October 7th, it became much more serious, and it became even a matter of survival for Palestinians, a matter of survival for Israelis, and a matter of survival, honestly, for the Jewish community abroad. I feel very strongly about this. I'm not Israeli, I don't live there. I care about peace in Israel and Palestine, but I also care about my safety and my security in the diaspora. And so these are the conversations we're having. But it's also it's very difficult. Like Nizar was saying, we don't have the tools, we don't have the frameworks to know what's going to happen, what the solution is, what the solution is, right? All we can do is continue to take action and to continue to have this relentless, optimistic hope that sometimes feels a bit delusional. But actually, can I spin my response to a question to Nizar? Because part of our conversation before coming here was, the arc, the narrative of the play is, yes, it's Rabin's assassination, but it's also the kind of these voices coming in and talking about the rise and the importance of Palestinian voice in the past 2 years. And my question, first, what responsibility, as Jews, we felt a certain kind of responsibility over the past 2 years. As Palestinians continue to have importance and leverage and stages and attention, what do you feel your responsibility is in this moment?
I think it's still the same. I ask those new questions. recognize that we're in an uncharted territory, and being unashamed about, I don't know what the answer is, and I'm trying. I might be right, I might be wrong. A lot of my friends criticize me for, engaging. In fact, when I was on the phone when I saw you, she's a friend of mine. She's Palestinian, Romanian, and she was part of Seeds of Peace. And she told me, no, those people don't want peace. This is all, a charade. They never wanted peace. They just wasted our time. Two of our friends of, Seeds of Peace were killed by people who also were in Seeds of Peace. In the end, the Israelis are committed to just having the land for themselves. Because I was telling her I'm going to normalize. I'm going into a normalization activity. I told her yes, and that's why we need to engage them, because we need to persuade them to do otherwise, right? We need to persuade them that they're not gonna get their goal by doing this, right? And what struck me with that conversation, but also the conversation we were having in A Land for All, that's also coordinating with Standing Together, is people collapsing their goal with the means, right? So whether it was Yigal or Rabin or others, where it's not a question of one state, two states. These are ways to get somewhere, right? We want security, we want safety, we want freedom, we want independence, we want prosperity. This is what we want, and we think a two-state solution is gonna achieve that. But what we want is safety, security, and freedom. And that looks different for me and different for somebody who's more conservative, and somebody who's Israeli, and somebody who's a diaspora Jew, right? So I think a lot of the stuck happens is in people arguing the tools and the vehicles, as opposed to what's the ultimate goal. Because if we agree that we share an ultimate goal, which is we want to be safe, Israelis have an experience of the Holocaust, of years of and millennia of persecution, and therefore they do not feel safe if they are not the majority. Because every time they were not the majority, they got persecuted, right? This happens to be the baggage they carry. Right? So, I borrowed this from a Gazan peace activist. He said that when reading Martin Luther King, he realized that for me to end the occupation, I need to end the Israeli fear of me, because they're occupying me because they think I'm gonna kill them. Right? So what do I need to do so that they are persuaded that I'm not going to kill them, right? It's right, it's wrong, it's putting the onus on the occupied. That's really not relevant. But if I want to be free, I'm gonna do whatever it takes. And if that takes me swallowing an injustice, me accepting that 100,000 people got killed, right? And these lives are not gonna come back, and we have 20,000 orphans, right? That's the baggage that we're carrying, and we're gonna have to do something about it. But what matters here is to keep focused on, we want a situation where each person is feeling safe, they feel safe. Like it's an agreement where everybody feels safe and feel that they can be themselves and have the freedoms that anybody enjoys. How we get there is something that we can agree on. So long as we agree that this is what we want, as opposed to no, we want one state, we want two states.
I'm going to take it to the audience for questions, but just in terms of what I just heard here, the path that you talk about, of where we can walk in safety in our own communities and with neighboring communities, are these incredible reckonings that have to go on. Israeli accountability for what they've done, Palestinian dealing with their own bad leadership, and dealing through the built-in structural inequality of rights and freedoms and power. These are the dilemmas on my mind for the conversations to the next play that's written by a Palestinian on how we go forward. But let me take it to the audience. Oh,
I have a comment.
absolutely.
First of all, I truly appreciate Nizar's presentation of his feelings. I'm disappointed of the way he presented the last statement. Israelis have to have accountability and the Palestinians have to change leadership. Both sides have to have accountability.
It's accountability. They're different accountabilities. Go ahead.
My name is Ariel Kushner. I was in 1977, 78, one of the founders of Peace Now movement. And throughout the last 30, 40 years, I have experienced terrible disappointments from the left side of the political spectrum, particularly the settlers, so that is not my world, but from the left side. My wife and I recently attended a meeting in Washington where Secretary General of one kibbutz came to talk about October 7. We're talking about the person that saw her kibbutz massacred, not by the people that he thought that they were the enemies. You know, she was telling us how surprised she was that the people that she used to give them jobs, feed them, take them to the hospitals, were massacred. So when we talk about accountability, when we talk about pursuing peace, we have to look at the reality in the eyes. We can't build fantasies. You know, I think that I was a little bit naive in the 70s, and I think peace is, and that two-state solution is the only way. But we can't continuously criticize Israel. Okay, one more example.
I want to ask you a question on that, if I may. But finish.
I work
your
in the
thought.
West Bank for a variety of reasons, projects, reconstruction projects. I have a lot of Palestinian friends who terribly, they hate Hamas. And I don't see that represented in today's demonstrations across America. Progressive Jews, I must say, very disappointed of them, because when they walk together with people that scream from the river to the sea, you cannot have peace. You cannot have peace. You have to, in order to build a two-state solution, you have to recognize the suffering of both sides, Palestinians and Israelis. And I think what you said was, you nailed it. You were excellent in your presentation.
And do you think that the accountabilities are equal and parallel?
What do you mean?
It's like what he said, you can't
this-
worry about which is which, I think.
They're just different, right?
Right.
They're different, and they also, there's
but
a reality of inequality and of freedom and rights. How do accountabilities deal with that in your view?
You cannot go to convince Israelis if you always attack Israelis. Okay? You have to, and I disagree with many of these Israelis. The same way that I think Hamas are not militants, are terrorists. That I have friends, homosexual Palestinians that live in Tel Aviv, because otherwise in Gaza they will be killed. Nobody talks about that. So we have to confront the reality of the 100-year conflict, and in order to face it as it is, not build these fantasies about if we eliminate the settlements, that will be the settlements are a terrible thing, but the peace process have to continue. Land for all, I support you in that, but I think that land for all has to come with looking at the other side with their fallacies and where as the package comes.
Okay, thanks.
I wanted to ask Nizar, because I really appreciate you actually talking about the play. Experiencing the divisions within the Israeli society and the brutal divisions, and the play forcing you to listen in song and in text to positions that are really, really difficult to hear and really difficult to spend time with. And yet you have a familiarity with divided society. What was your experience, moment to moment, just pick a moment or two, of spending uncomfortable time, and what was the efficacy, if anything, of spending that time in this play with something so contrary to what you would hope for from an Israeli?
Well, I think it's the quintessential Palestinian experience, right? We're invisible to the Israelis, right? So, for example, when the mother was talking about slice, right? That's completely tone deaf to the fact that Palestinians every day
Are losing.
right? But for she only sees that. She doesn't see anything else, right? It's like this famous Sri Lankan tale of a woman that's been abused by her husband for 30 years. He beats her up and what have you. And one fine day, she gets sick and tired of him beating her. She goes to the kitchen and gets a knife and stabs him 17 times. And every time his parents talk about this story, they start from she went to the kitchen and got the knife and stabbed him 17 times. They don't talk about the 30 years before that. And that is always recurring in general, whether it's in general Americans are less familiar than people who are there, but Israelis also I related with Yigal, right? This zealousness, this it's more than drive, right? Because I felt it too. There were times where I felt I had a national responsibility, right? Things are going the wrong way. We need to stop this train, right? And if it takes, sacrificing myself, I'm gonna, right? So, this is extremely undemocratic, right? Who are you, right? It belittles the others and the rights of others. Is that who are you? Like, Sinwar didn't ask the Gazans about the war, right? Did he? Right? So, is that an injustice or is it the right thing to do? Is it right of Rabin to cede land, or is it not? Is it something sacrilegious, right? Hamas would argue, and Jihad Islami, is this land is not ours, it's God's, and God put us to be the guardians. We do not actually have the right to give it to the Israelis, right? So you're going to need to engage that. Now, I'm 50, right? So I've seen a lot. So I appreciate the ignorance that a lot of Israelis have about this, and how Israel has effectively sheltered them from seeing, right? The bypass roads were less about security and more about making sure that Israelis can go from a settlement to Jerusalem to Tel Aviv and not see a single Palestinian and think as if everything is fine. October 7th happened because Palestinians wanted to show that no, nothing is fine. And you're not gonna have peace by just talking to the Emiratis. We're still here, right? You can't just dismiss us. It's not a justification. What I'm saying is, this is how they wanted to make that point. They made it very clearly, right? And there was this price. So yes, it's difficult. It's just like African Americans hearing, white allies talk about, standing with African Americans, but then living in white neighborhoods that are red line, or women listening to men who are call themselves feminists, but then engage in sexual harassment, right? So I'm familiar with that power dynamic, but I choose to. The feeling is true. I feel the feeling, but I choose what to do with that feeling, right? So I am intentional. I get offended and I feel othered and I feel invisible, right? And I make a rational calculation that I don't have time to explain to this person that I exist. So let me do what is the best use of my time with this person now? What is something I can tell that person that is gonna let them double check their assumptions, that they are safe and they've got this, right? So I think engaging Israelis, engaging those stories has helped me better make those decisions and understand what battles to fight and what are losing battles, I think. So that's what I get out of those.
Let's take one more from the audience. And Julie, do you want to comment on this, or you want to wait till this next question? Okay.
I want to believe that there's a possibility around the corner of, as you allude to, a new politics that's interested in peace. I've been to Israel twice since October 7th, and one of the things that struck me and worried me the most was that I spoke to many people who still believed in peace, but they were nearly all my parents' age or older, and of the young people that I interacted with, very, very, very few were even interested in that possibility, and many of them were quite right-wing. So where could this new movement come from on the Israeli side and then also on the Palestinian side, which I'm less personally acquainted with?
That's a good place.
So I am much younger than Nizar and Stephen, so I'm justified in being more hopeful and being less dreadful about the future, being more optimistic. For me personally, the driving force of all of this and the trust I have is in the personal relationships I have, Israelis and Palestinians. And it's my friendship with Palestinians that really convinces me that an alternative is possible, and it's our job, it's our duty to make that happen. And at the end of the day, what other option is there? Are we going to continue on this path? Are Israelis and Palestinians destined to murder each other for the rest of eternity? I understand that might be naive, but there can be a right combination of pragmatism and hope.
So to answer your question, I'm old. So I've been wrong so many times, right? My hope comes from there. I thought certain things were impossible and then they happened, right? So it's that humility, knowing that, like, who would have thought the leader of the settlement movement, Ariel Sharon, would be the one who would remove settlements from Gaza, right? Who would have thought that after Israel managed to kick the PLO from Lebanon and put them 1,000 miles away, 5 years later, the Intifada happens from inside, right? So, like, it happens. Or the Arab Spring. Things like that do happen, right? But also, that's necessary, but it's not sufficient. For it to be sufficient, you actually need the soil. You need the scaffolding upon which this is gonna build. And this is something that most of the also architects agree that was a mistake, is that the people-to-people was an afterthought. This was a up-down solution. The fact that it had to be agreed in secret tells you everything, right? So my hope is starting this conversation again from, I don't know how we get there, but I know that the goal is freedom, safety, and integrity, and for all. And here, for example, correcting all of those pervasive mistakes that we do, like talking about hate and over romanticizing, making it a Greek tragedy. Like, it doesn't need to be a Greek tragedy. There is kind of a fetishization of it, right? People don't just hate. People hate not feeling safe. People hate being oppressed, right? So we're gonna need to be compassionate with Hamas and with the settlers and with Yigal, and understand that they're coming from a place of, like, nobody sleeps thinking they're the bad guy, right? It's like Yigal said. Now it wasn't Yigal, it was his wife, right? That the Goyim would never accept us. we need to accept that we will always be hated by the world. Like that's a philosophy. That's a very sad place to be in, right? To believe, to have lost faith in humanity, right? What must she have seen to believe that it's impossible for the world to accept me as a Jew and will always have anti-Semitism, and therefore it's a fool's errand to think that we can have partners, even in the US, right? So that's what I need to work on. How do I make her regain faith in humanity? And quite frankly, part of what I'm challenged with is my Gazan friends, because for them, like I have many Gazan friends who say we're not Palestinian, we're Gazan. The sense of betrayal they have with the world, the fact that it's been 2 years of a televised genocide and it wasn't stopped, right? What does that say about the world? Well, next time, I mean,